When my grandfather looked me straight in the eye and asked, "So, what do you do for work these days?" I felt the entire room pause. The clinking of silverware stopped, the murmurs of conversation died out, and even the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. Everyone at that table had been waiting for this moment, though none of them knew it yet. They thought they were about to hear another excuse, another story about how I was struggling, another confirmation that I hadn't measured up to the family's impossible standards. But I had something else prepared. I smiled, lifted my glass slowly, and let the silence stretch just long enough for their smugness to grow. My cousins leaned forward slightly, eager to hear what failure they could mock me for this time. My parents braced themselves for disappointment, as they always did. And my grandfather, the man whose opinion had dictated the value of every person at that table, fixed me with a cold, expectant gaze. What I said next made every single person freeze. The smirks slipped from their faces. Forks dangled halfway to mouths, and my grandfather's eyes widened in a way I had never seen before. For the first time in my life, I had their undivided attention, not because they were about to laugh at me, but because they didn't know how to process the truth I had just revealed, the truth that I had been waiting years to unleash. You see, this moment didn't happen overnight. It was born out of years of insults, years of humiliation, years of being treated like the family disappointment. I had carried those words with me, words my grandfather had spoken when I was 12 years old, words that burned into my memory like they were carved in stone. He said I would never amount to anything, that no matter how hard I tried, I would always fall behind the others. I swore that day that I would prove him wrong. But not just him. Every single person who had ever looked at me and seen less than I knew I was. And so while they spent years underestimating me, I spent years building something they couldn't even imagine. Quietly, secretly, I put in the work. I endured their mockery, their sideways glances, their pity. I let them believe they were right about me, all so I could have this moment, this dinner, this question, this silence. And when it finally came, when my grandfather leaned forward with that familiar smirk and asked about my job, I knew it was time. Time to let the mask fall. Time to turn the tables. Time to watch their carefully constructed world of arrogance and superiority shatter into pieces they would never be able to put back together again. So I gave him my answer, and with that single sentence, I ended a lifetime of doubt. Let me take you back to where it all began. ... My name is Sarah. I'm 30 years old, and if I had to describe myself in one sentence, I'd say I've always been the quiet, hard-working one in the family. The one who never caused trouble, never demanded attention, and never quite lived up to the expectations everyone else had for me. Growing up, I thought that if I just kept my head down and did the right things, I'd earn respect. But in my family, respect didn't come from kindness, effort, or even character. It came from appearances, from titles, from money. I grew up in a traditional household where success was measured in how much you could brag about at the dinner table. My cousins became the benchmarks of achievement. One was accepted into medical school. Another took over a family business. Another married into wealth. Every gathering turned into a competition of who could show off the most. New cars parked in the driveway, designer clothes worn just for the evening, stories of promotions and bonuses told like fairy tales. My cousins became the benchmarks of achievement. One was accepted into medical school. Another took over a family business. Another married into wealth. Every gathering turned into a competition of who could show off the most. New cars parked in the driveway, designer clothes worn just for the evening, stories of promotions and bonuses told like fairy tales. And every time, without fail, I was reminded that I was the one who didn't measure up. I wasn't lazy. Far from it, I worked harder than most of them. But my path wasn't the one they approved of. I didn't chase status for the sake of status. I wanted something meaningful, something that felt like mine. Even as a child, I dreamed not of becoming a doctor or lawyer just to impress people, but of building something with my own hands, something that mattered. But to my family, dreams like that weren't worth anything unless they came with a big paycheck and a title you could flaunt. And then there was my grandfather, the patriarch of the family, the man whose opinion everyone sought and whose approval was treated like gold. Sharp-tongued, brutally honest, and never shy about voicing disappointment. He was respected by all, feared by some, and completely unyielding when it came to his definition of success. In his eyes, you either proved your worth through wealth and titles, or you were nothing. I remember the moment that defined my childhood, the one I never forgot. I was 12 years old, walking past the study late one night when I overheard my grandfather speaking to my father. His voice carried that usual tone of authority, the kind that left no room for argument. He said, almost casually, "That girl will never amount to anything." I froze where I stood. My heart pounded, but I didn't make a sound. I just stood there in the dark hallway, listening to the words that carved themselves into me like scars. Never amount to anything. Those 4 words burned in my chest, hotter than any insult I'd ever heard before. I swore right then and there that one day I would prove him wrong, that one day I would stand tall in front of him and show him that the girl he dismissed so easily had become more than he could ever imagine. My young adult years were not what anyone would call smooth. I struggled in school, not because I didn't care, but because I wasn't the kind of student who thrived under constant pressure and comparisons. Every mistake was magnified. Every failure held up like a mirror to remind me of what I wasn't. And my cousins, they made sure I never forgot. They excelled in everything: grades, sports, recognition. At family gatherings, they wore their medals like armor, their certificates like crowns. I was always the one sitting quietly in the corner, pretending not to notice the smirks they shared whenever someone brought up my average report card. When I reached adulthood, I tried to carve out a life for myself. I didn't chase the paths my family worshipped. I didn't apply to medical school, didn't beg for a job in the family business, didn't try to marry someone who could impress my grandfather. Instead, I made choices that felt right for me, choices that gave me peace, even if they didn't give me prestige. I took jobs that others dismissed as beneath them, because I believed every step mattered, no matter how small. I even married someone my family disapproved of, someone who didn't come from wealth or status, but who treated me with kindness, something I rarely felt growing up. We lived modestly. No big house, no shiny car in the driveway, no luxury vacations to brag about. But we had happiness in the little things: home-cooked meals, laughter, late-night conversations. For a while, I thought that would be enough to shield me from the weight of my family's judgment. But every family dinner reminded me otherwise. Those dinners were like battlegrounds. My cousins came armed with new promotions, new business ventures, new milestones. One cousin had just opened a law firm. Another was buying property overseas. Another had just been promoted to a senior doctor. My grandfather would beam with pride. his voice booming across the table as he praised them, his words dripping with admiration. And when it came to me, silence. Sometimes he would skip over me entirely, moving on to the next cousin, as if I weren't even sitting there. Other times, he would glance at me briefly, then clear his throat and change the subject. That silence cut deeper than any insult. I learned to live with it, at least on the surface. I smiled politely, nodded at their stories, and let the nights pass. But inside, I was keeping score. Not out of bitterness, but out of determination. Because while they laughed at my modest life, while they dismissed me as a failure, I was working on something none of them could see. They thought I was stuck. They thought I was lost. They thought I was nothing. What they didn't know was that while they laughed, I was building something in secret. Something that would one day turn every smirk into silence. It happened, as it always did, at another one of those endless family gatherings. I had barely taken my seat when the familiar rhythm began. Cousins bragging about their promotions, their new houses, their expensive trips abroad. I listened quietly, as I always did, until one of my cousins decided to turn the spotlight on me. With that smug little grin of his, he leaned back in his chair and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, she's still job hopping. Can't stick to anything. Every few months, it's something new. She just can't figure it out." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp. A chuckle here, a smirk there. The kind of reaction that says more than words ever could. And then came my grandfather's voice, steady, heavy, and cutting through the room like a blade. He didn't laugh. He didn't joke. He simply looked at me and said, "Some people just aren't cut out for greatness." That sentence hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I forced a small laugh, pretending it didn't bother me, as though I could brush it aside like dust off my shoulder. But inside, my chest burned. Rage bubbled beneath my calm exterior, rage I had carried with me for years. It wasn't the first time my family had dismissed me. It wasn't the first time they made me feel like the outsider at my own table. But in that moment, something shifted. I realized there was no point in waiting for their approval. No point in hoping that one day they would see me for who I was. They didn't care about kindness or effort or passion. They only cared about power, prestige, and wealth. 3 things they believed I had none of. And maybe that was the greatest irony of all. Because what none of them knew, what none of them even suspected, was that I was already far more successful than they could ever imagine. I had built something in silence, in secrecy, in shadows they never thought to look into. They saw only what I allowed them to see: ordinary jobs, modest living, a quiet life. What they couldn't see was the foundation I had been laying brick by brick, the empire I was building piece by piece. That night, as their laughter faded into meaningless chatter, I sat quietly, smiling to myself. They thought they had cut me down. They thought their words had left me powerless. But the truth was, their arrogance had given me exactly what I needed: the perfect fuel. Every insult, every smirk, every dismissive comment became fire in my veins, pushing me harder, driving me further. And as I looked across the table at their proud, self-satisfied faces, I thought to myself, what if I told you the truth? What if I told you that while you sit here bragging about your promotions and titles, I've already surpassed you all? What if I told you that your empire of pride is nothing compared to what I've built in silence? Of course, I didn't tell them, not yet, because I knew one day the truth would come out, and when it did, it wouldn't just be an answer. It would be the moment their world stopped turning. What my family didn't know was that behind the scenes, everything in my life was changing. Quietly, steadily, and completely out of their sight, the little projects they mocked were growing into something much bigger. My so-called unstable jobs were never failures. They were stepping stones. My startup was taking off. My creative work was gaining recognition, and my investments were multiplying in ways that would have stunned them. But I didn't tell anyone. Not a word. I kept it hidden, locked away like a secret weapon, waiting for the right moment to unleash it. Meanwhile, my family continued their little parade of superiority. Every time we gathered, they flaunted their new cars, their bigger houses, their shiny jewelry. They threw around words like promotion and bonus as though they were badges of honor. And when the spotlight turned to me, the room grew cold. Sometimes they ignored me entirely. Other times, they whispered about me as though I wasn't even there. Invitations to big family decisions and events stopped coming altogether. I was treated like an outsider, as though my presence brought shame to their perfect image. The truth is, they weren't just trying to keep me out. They wanted me to feel small. And most of the time, I let them believe they had succeeded. I played the role of the quiet one, the one who didn't fight back. But inside, I was watching. I was calculating. I was waiting. Sometimes. And then came the birthday party. A night I will never forget. My grandfather was at the head of the table, his voice carrying as it always did, commanding attention from everyone in the room. After praising one cousin for buying a new property and another for getting promoted at work, his gaze finally fell on me. His eyes narrowed, and his lips curled into the faintest smirk before he said the words that sliced straight into me. "You're just a failure living off scraps." The room went silent. For a moment, even the cousins who usually laughed at me looked away, uncomfortable. But he didn't stop there. He shook his head as if disappointed in the very blood that ran through me. It wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration, a stamp on my identity that he wanted everyone else to remember. I smiled faintly, pretending the words hadn't broken me. But inside, something cracked open. Something that had been building for years finally burst free. That was the moment I decided. No more swallowing their insults. No more hiding what I had built. No more giving them the satisfaction of thinking they were right about me. That night, I swore I wouldn't just prove him wrong. I wouldn't just earn respect. I was going to make him choke on every single word he had ever said about me. And for that, I needed the perfect moment. One night, I found myself alone in the dark kitchen, the house quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I had been crying, soft, useless tears that felt more like release than defeat. But when the sobs subsided, I walked to the mirror and looked at the woman who had been called nothing so many times. I saw the same face I had seen for years. Tired eyes, small smile, a posture that had learned to make itself small so it wouldn't be noticed. But that night, something in my reflection looked different. There was a hardness there now, a line of resolve that had not existed before. I stood there, hands pressed flat against the cool glass, and I made a vow. Not the kind you make when you're angry and will forget by morning. This was a carved-in-iron promise. I promised myself that I would not give them the easy victory of a quick retort or a proud announcement. I would not let my success be a fleeting moment of gloating. If I was going to claim what I deserved, I would do it in a way that mattered, in a moment that would cut through their arrogance and leave no room for denial. The perfect moment had to be more than a private triumph. It had to be public, unavoidable, and tailored for maximum impact. I thought about all the times my grandfather sat at the head of the table, basking in the glow of his own approval as he pronounced who was worthy and who was not. His annual family dinner was the altar where he worshipped pedigree and status. That was where he loved to parade his favorites, where cousins beamed under his praise, and phone cameras captured his approval like trophies. If I wanted him to feel the sting of being wrong, if I wanted the whole family to watch him falter, that dinner was the place. So, I decided I would wait. I would continue to move forward quietly, building and expanding in ways they couldn't see. I would keep my friends close, my victories closer, and my plans closest of all. I would let the world think I was meek and use that underestimation as camouflage. I would let their smugness bloom, and then I would pluck it down in front of everyone. In that moment before the mirror, I sketched out the contours of my revenge like a careful blueprint. Timing was everything. The reveal had to be at the table where their judgments were performed like rituals. The proof had to be undeniable. Documents, public recognition, someone influential who could corroborate my story. I didn't want fireworks and theatrics. I wanted something so simple and sharp that it would silence them by sheer clarity. I also promised myself one more thing. I would not become them. I would not let my need for vindication hollow me out. This wasn't about humiliating my grandfather for the pleasure of it. It was about reclaiming my dignity and exposing the cruelty of a family that measured worth in the wrong currency. I would let the truth do the work. That night, I went to bed, not with plans for immediate retaliation, but with a patient hunger. I would prepare until I could not be ignored. I would plan until the moment was flawless. And when the annual dinner came, the glittering table, the expectant faces, my grandfather's booming voice, I would be ready. I would answer his question in a way that would change everything. I treated my plan like a project, and projects need structure. The first step was preparation, not impulsive, not theatrical, but meticulous. I polished every corner of what I had built until it shone in ways they couldn't ignore. Financials were tightened, contracts finalized, public recognitions cued. I made sure performance metrics, client testimonials, and legal paperwork all lined up like soldiers in formation. I watched the numbers climb quietly, satisfied with the slow, steady proof that what they called small was actually substantial. I didn't need fireworks. I needed ironclad facts. Step 2 was secrecy. If arrogance feeds on perceived weakness, then I would starve theirs. I kept my life deliberately ordinary in front of them. I accepted invitations I couldn't really afford, asked to borrow small sums for absurd reasons, and let rumors of instability drift in their circles. I posted photos of humble dinners, gentle smiles, and the mundane routines of a simple life. I let them see the version of me that fit their narrative, unremarkable, small, safe to underestimate. Behind that curtain, though, my accounts were growing, deals were closing, and my reputation in the industry was quietly gaining respect. They never suspected their underestimated relative was the one building the foundation under their feet. Step 3 was building suspense. This had to feel inevitable when it happened, like the truth had been waiting for them all along. I orchestrated circumstances so that my family would all be present at the right moment. Invitations were nudged, schedules subtly influenced, and the annual dinner became the magnet I needed. I made sure distant cousins, the ones who loved to share gossip, would be there. I made sure my grandfather would attend, basking in his usual role as judge and laureate. If anyone was missing, the impact would be diluted. I wanted a full audience, every face present to witness the collapse of their assumptions. Step 4 was evidence. I didn't rely on emotion or accusation. I brought proof, I collected articles that mentioned my name, press releases, contracts with recognizable companies, and financial statements that left no room for doubt. I printed headlines, compiled screenshots, and saved testimonials from clients who could vouch for me. I arranged for a quiet ally, a business partner or investor who could, if necessary, confirm my claims in a calm voice. No one likes being humiliated by hearsay. People accept facts. Facts would do the heavy lifting. Throughout all of this, I kept my tone measured. This wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was justice by clarity. I wanted the reveal to feel surgical, clean, precise, unavoidable. I rehearsed nothing publicly and rehearsed everything privately. The order of disclosures, the documents to slide across the table, the one sentence that would pierce the room. I sharpened my patience until it was a weapon. They thought I was planning a spectacle. I was planning something else entirely. I wasn't just planning a reveal. I was planning a humiliation so complete they'd never forget it. The night arrived like any other. Plates clinked, voices rose and fell, and the proud stories flowed in well-practiced lines. I sat at the table, an island of calm, listening to cousin after cousin move from one boast to the next. Promotions that had doubled salaries, new cars that gleamed under the porch light, engagements and lavish wedding plans. They spoke as if the world measured worth by titles and headlights, and everyone nodded along, hungry for the next trophy to admire. I smiled and nodded with them, the quiet one, the familiar punctuation in their parade of success. Then, as if on cue, my grandfather turned his attention to me. His eyes fixed, the room tightened, and his voice cut clean through the chatter. "And you? Still doing nothing with your life?" he asked, equal parts challenge and dismissal. The question landed like a gauntlet thrown at my feet. I felt it, but I let it rest there, heavy and expectant. I took a slow sip of my drink and let the silence sit between us like a held breath. My cousins exchanged knowing looks, waiting for the stumble they were sure would come. My uncle's posture tightened. He was ready to deliver the pitying reassurance he always offered. I smiled, not out of cowardice, but because I had rehearsed patience more than any speech. "Actually, Grandpa," I began, my voice deliberate and calm, "I've been working on something." I let the words hang, vague and tantalizing. I didn't explain. I let them fill in the blanks with their assumptions. That small uncertainty made them lean forward, making their own questions louder than mine. I described it slowly, almost casually, choosing details that drew them in without giving everything away. I spoke about long nights, partnerships that began over coffee, contracts that took months to finalize. I mentioned clients with recognizable names, projects that started as tiny ideas and grew into real, measurable results. Their smiles wavered. Forks paused halfway to mouths. And then I dropped the fact that would tilt the table. "One of the companies I run actually employs members of our family," I said. I watched as the room tried to rearrange this new information into their old narratives and failed. "You mean," my cousin started, but I let him flounder. "Yes," I continued, "I own the company where your son works." The sound the room made wasn't a sound so much as a collective intake of breath. Utensils hovered. Conversations died. For the first time in years, every head at that table turned toward me with the same hungry, unbelieving stare I'd received as a child, only now their faces showed confusion instead of contempt. I kept going, careful and measured. I mentioned the international conference that had invited me to speak next month. I said, almost as an aside, that a well-known magazine had recently run a profile about the work I was doing. Those names, those markers of recognition, landed with the weight of undeniable proof. My grandfather's face shifted slowly, as if he were reading something that didn't belong in his world. The color drained a little from his cheeks. He looked at me, really looked, and for the first time the certainty in his eyes faltered. The golden grandson he had championed now had a new position in the room: subordinate. The notion seemed to choke him, and in that silence I heard the softest, sharpest sound of all: pride cracking. The moment my words sank into the air, silence held the room like a steel cage. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Forks remained suspended, drinks forgotten mid-sip, eyes darting between me and my grandfather, as though waiting for him to dismiss it as a joke. But he didn't. He couldn't. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing, searching for the old version of me, the weak, unremarkable shadow he'd mocked for years. But I wasn't there anymore. The silence cracked with stammered protests. A cousin, the one who had mocked me most viciously, tried to laugh it off. "That can't be true. She's exaggerating." His voice wobbled, his confidence unraveling with every syllable. Another cousin shifted uncomfortably, as if realizing he had bragged minutes ago about a promotion at the very company I now claimed as mine. Their words collapsed into noise, excuses and denials scrambling to rebuild the hierarchy they had lived in for so long. I reached into my bag, calm and deliberate, and slid a stack of neatly bound papers onto the polished table. Contracts, articles, and balance sheets lay in front of them, proof they could not argue with. My uncle leaned forward, his hand trembling slightly as he scanned the letterhead, recognition dawning on his face. And then, as though rehearsed, I pulled out one final piece: a tablet. With a flick, the screen lit up to a video of me standing on a stage, speaking at a conference, the audience hanging on my words. Their gasps rippled through the room. "While you all doubted me," I said evenly, my voice carrying into every corner of that dining hall, "I built an empire right under your noses." My eyes scanned the faces around me, those who had sneered, mocked, and dismissed me for years. Every insult, every smirk, every time you told me I wasn't enough, it fueled me. I didn't just succeed in spite of you. I succeeded because of you. The weight of my confession pressed down on them, and I could see it, shame etching itself into their expressions. Cousins who had once strutted now slumped. My uncle sat back, defeated. Even the younger relatives, usually shielded from the family's cruel comparisons, stared at me in awe. The script they had been raised to believe, torn apart in one night. Then came the ultimate blow. I leaned forward, meeting my grandfather's gaze. "Do you want to know why I hid it all? Why I let you think I was struggling?" The room leaned in with me, anticipation thick. "Because I wanted this moment. I wanted to hold up a mirror and show you your arrogance. I wanted you to see that while you were busy ridiculing me, I was building something you could never take away." Grandpa opened his mouth, searching for the words that had always come so easily to him. A dismissal, a cutting remark, some way to reassert his throne. But nothing came. His lips trembled, his voice failed, and the silence betrayed him. For the first time, everyone saw him not as the patriarch, but as a man whose pride had finally collapsed under the weight of truth. No one spoke. They didn't need to. His hypocrisy hung in the air, undeniable and exposed. And in that stillness, I knew I had won. Not just the argument, not just the recognition, but the war he had started years ago with a single cruel sentence. When the final silence settled over the table, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smirk. I didn't bask in the chaos I had caused. Instead, I pushed my chair back slowly, the sound of its legs scraping the floor echoing like a full stop to a story that had taken decades to write. Every eye followed me as I stood, but I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't crave their applause. I carried something far heavier, far more powerful: dignity. I didn't gloat. I didn't deliver another cutting line. I simply straightened my shoulders and walked away, leaving behind a table full of people who had once taken pride in breaking me. In that moment, my calm became my victory. Their silence became my crown. As I stepped out into the cool night air, my revenge wasn't about money. It wasn't about proving I had more power or bigger numbers in my bank account. It was about respect. And that night, I finally earned mine. Days turned into weeks, and life continued. Only this time it was different. The flash forward played like scenes from a new life. Mornings spent working on projects that excited me. Late nights filled with ideas and passion rather than self-doubt. My business grew steadily. Doors kept opening. And for the first time, I allowed myself to truly enjoy the success I had built. The whispers of my family no longer defined me. My own voice finally did. The family dynamic shifted, though not cleanly. Some relatives reached out, their tones softer than before. Apologies laced into their words. They admitted they had been wrong, that they had underestimated me. Others, of course, clung to their bitterness, their pride refusing to bend even when truth demanded it. But I didn't need their approval anymore.